to Lit Chick on a Mighty Blaze. I'm so thrilled today to have Jamie Brenner with me. Oh, I'm Jenna Paone, by the way, as if you didn't know. But we have the fabulous Jamie Brenner here today to talk about her new book, Blush. Welcome, Jamie. How are you?
I am so happy to be back. A Mighty Blaze going strong is very heartening.
Yes.
And I give hats off to you guys for keeping this going through the pandemic, through it all, into this new world we are emerging in.
I know it's an interesting thing. It does seem kind of like virtual events are sort of here to stay, and it's great to keep this going. As always, thank you to our founders, Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt, who have really built this organization up. We're now I think we're at 50 people strong that are part of this organization. Everybody does their interviews, and we have lots of different regular interview series like this one, Lit Chick, where we talk to our fabulous women's fiction and rom-com and romance writers. And of course, you and your book fit perfectly, into this world. We love you so much here at A Mighty Blaze. And this new book is it really is I feel like Emily Henry had a quote in her blurb for your book where she said, it's a book that's meant to be sipped and savored. You'll want to gulp it down right away, but it's meant to be savored. And I couldn't agree more. I had so much fun reading this. It was such a transportive and, just sensory treat. Just lovely. Thank you so much for the book. It's wonderful.
Thank you. Well, this book has been like a wine in a like grape juice in a barrel. It's something I've wanted to write for so long and just couldn't quite figure out how to tell this story. Mm-hmm. The books, I grew up reading books like Chances by Jackie Collins and Mistral's Daughter and Scruples by Judith Krantz. And now that I'm older, I look back and I think, why did those books have such a big impact on me, on the way I saw the world and on who I wanted to be? So when I was thinking about Blush, I really wanted to tell the story of 3 generations of women who discover and rediscover these books and how it changes them in a moment of conflict.
I love it. It's so great. And you feel that love. I want to, before we get into the book, I just want to give everyone just a quick rundown. If you're new to Jamie Brenner, I don't think you are. I think you're a pretty leading voice in women's fiction right now, but I want to just give your bio real quick and let everybody know about all your wonderful accomplishments. And then we're going to dive right back into that because I love everything about Blush. But Jamie Brenner is the author of 6 novels, including The Forever Summer and The Wedding Sisters, and now Blush, which is being published by Putnam on June 22nd, 2021. She grew up in suburban Philadelphia on a steady diet of Jackie Collins and Judith Krantz novels, and later moved to New York City to live like the heroines of her favorite books. Jamie divides her time between Philadelphia and Provincetown. And Blush is one of Bustle's 44 new must-read books out this June, one of E! News' 16 books to add to your reading list, one of Good Morning America's 27 books for June, one of Veranda's 32 new books you don't want to miss this summer, one of Frolic's 25 best books of summer 2021. And of Blush, Kirkus Reviews says, Brenner deftly pulls from the canon of steamy encounters and dramatic confrontations, some worthy of a Dynasty reboot, a perfect beach read about a family in crisis resolved by women. And Booklist says, Brenner's delectable soap opera is the epitome of escapist reading pleasure. And I couldn't agree more. Congratulations on Blush. And it is coming out June 22nd, so make sure you pre-order, get your copy, because trust me, you don't want to miss this one because it's so good. But let's go back into talking about Blush. You've already kind of told us, but let's hear a little more about your inspiration and a little bit about the book.
So I wanted to I write summer books. I've been writing a book every summer for the past 5 or 6 years.
Yep.
And as much as I love the beach and beach settings, I wanted to try something a little bit different.
Yep.
And around this time, I discovered that I was living in Manhattan at the time, that the North Fork of Long Island, just an hour and a half away from me in the bustle of Manhattan, are all of these beautiful vineyards.
So great.
And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. And that many of these vineyards are family owned. And that the first vineyard on Long Island actually was established in 1971, around the same time that the books that I started reading as a teenager were being written. So all of this kind of coalesced into the idea of blush. And the title blush, you know, it refers to, like, obviously you blush when you're embarrassed, like if you're reading a racy novel, but rosé wine, the first incarnation of rosé wine was actually called blush. It was a much sweeter version, and it was a fad, and it came and it went. So that is sort of like the beginning of the story.
Right.
So in Blush, there are 3 women, and I always like to tell the story from 3 different points of view, at the very least. So in this book, we have the matriarch, Vivian, a grandmother. We have her daughter, Leah, who's in her early 50s, and then the granddaughter, Sadie, who's entering her senior year of college. And now every summer, these women convene at the family vineyard, and they have a vacation together. But this year, when Leah arrives with her daughter, she discovers that the vineyard is in trouble, and her parents are really, of course, it's in trouble.
You have to say vineyard.
Yeah. And, you know, so, and really, the family might lose it. At the same time, Sadie, the daughter, discovers in the library of the house on the vineyard these old novels from the 1980s, like Lace and by Shirley Conran, Jackie Collins books, Judith Cran's books, and she discovers that her grandmother had basically a trashy novel book club.
Which I love, which is like my new, like, that's my goal in life, is to have a trashy novel book. I think this is like my version of a trashy book, like literally my version of that. Only I don't think they're trashy. I think they're the best books in the world. And I know it's very different, like the books now versus the 1980s, like those novels really were like they're pretty racy. Like they
are racy, but I think part of what I'm trying to explore in this book is, you know, what is a trashy novel and what is a classic novel? And there's a quote I have in the book by Italo Calvino where he says, a classic is just a book that never finishes what it's trying to say. And I think that absolutely applies to the books that were written by these women in the late 70s and mid 80s who, yes, they wrote explicit sex, but what they're really trying to write about was freedom and making your own choices and being happy.
You know, on that note, like, so I do want to, I have my lots of my questions. I was going to get to this later, but the biggest thing about, you know, what this novel, what I took from this novel is you have this really, you know, lovely, you know, told in a lovely way, but it really is an exploration of like the misogyny and the sexism that's inherent in art, in businesses like winemaking, in, you know, in our own families. Like this sort of, you know, it's not always like necessarily the most overt or the most cruel, but there's this subtle misogyny underlying everything of like, what's the difference between a female enjoyable pleasure pastime and a male one? And for some reason, like, you know, we don't call men like you're watching your trashy sports and drinking your trashy beer. But like if you're drinking rosé and you're talking about, you know, the books that you really enjoy that happen to feature women and happen to be about relationships, somehow it's like a lesser than, you know, there's this subtle mockery with these things. And the whole book really tackles that. You know, you talk about there's a plot line that where Susan Sontag features very heavily, and, you know, who we think of as like kind of an ultimate voice in literary heft and artistic heft. And it discusses like the idea of camp and like which is the opposite, you know, and I mean that as campiness, being the opposite of true art or heavy art or things like that. And you use one of her quotes, which is, and one cheats oneself as a human being if one has respect only for the style of high culture, whatever else one may do or feel on the sly. The whole point of camp is to dethrone the serious. So clearly, like, I mean, you're writing in a genre that is labeled women's fiction and somehow carries less of a literary heft than, you know, literary fiction. And yet there's no difference. I mean, if you look at your books are as tightly plotted as, you know, as the characters are have great depth, and real complex problems. We're talking about all these issues, and yet somehow there's this designation of this is women's fiction. So clearly, I think that you have a lot of feelings about that, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, and sort of how you approach that and how you work that into your writing, because it's very overt in this book, and it seems purposeful to me.
I think, I don't mind being classified as women fiction or beach read, but
I don't either, by the way. Like that,
I don't mind. Yeah. What I minded is when I realized as I got older that I felt a certain, because I worked in book publishing, I lived in New York, I traveled in very high culture circles. And when people ask me, like, what's your favorite novel or this, I would pull from things that I'd read, but it wasn't really true.
Yeah.
And I actually remember my daughter won a poetry contest, and we ended up having lunch with the faculty of Princeton's English department.
Mm-hmm.
And I was sitting at lunch with the faculty in the Princeton dining room, and the professor sitting next to me asked me, what do you do? I said, I'm a writer. And when I told him about my books, I could see like myself losing him.
Yeah.
And it really bothered me. And Sadie, the daughter, is based on a bit from my daughter, who reads Julia Kristeva and read Susan Sontag, and really kind of sees things through a very feminist way. And after that visit at Princeton, I felt like I needed to talk to her that there's all different forms of feminism.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, my idea of strength and femininity and adventure was formed not by Jane Austen, but by Jackie Collins.
I love it.
And that's just the way it is.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like when did these books come into your life? Like clearly they've had a huge impact. I mean, they're mentioned in your bio, and I recall they were mentioned in your bio before this book. Like that, and that has a huge influence in the same way that like I look back on my childhood and like the books, like I was influenced by so many great books, but mostly books that were focused on girls. I think of Little Women and I think of Anne and Green Gables, but also The Babysitter's Club and Sweet Valley High. And like, those books that were like, I remember my mom not liking that I read The Babysitter's Club, and but I loved them. Like, did the Jackie Collins and Judith Krantz stuff, like, did they come into your life in a similar way where you felt like, I'm not supposed to be reading these, or like, maybe these are a little much? Like, how did you become, how did you kind of fall for these authors?
I don't remember how I knew to get the book out of the library, but I knew I had to do it in a very surreptitious way. So I would check out, let's say, Chances. And I would also check out like Nancy Drew. Yeah. And then I would go into my home and swap out the book covers. So when my parents came in my room, I looked like I was reading something appropriate.
Oh my God, I
love it. And that is really what I did. And I think the reason the books resonated so much is, it's hard for girls growing up today to understand what it was like in the 70s and 80s, where there was still very much a 1950s ethos hanging over our culture.
Yep.
My mother always told me it was more important. Like, I was told not to do sports, that boys don't like girls who are athletic. I was told, when I get married, that it's very important to look presentable when my husband came home. No one ever talked about a career or a job for me versus my brother. Except my dad was like, you can do whatever you want to do. Now, so the Jackie Collins stories, it was clear it was not that important that the women had to be beautiful, although they were. They were rewarded for being smart, and they were rewarded for taking chances. And that was a really big counter message to what I was seeing and hearing in my everyday life as a teenager in suburban Philadelphia in the 1980s.
Yeah. And I think I don't think it's insignificant that there was a lot of overt sexual stuff in them as well, at a time when like girls were really encouraged to not be sexual in any way. I mean, we're still only kind of getting to the point where like women and girls are allowed to be sexual in any sort of way. And this was like in a lot of ways, it was like the permissible way of being sexual was like you could write about it and you could read about it. Like, and even if you couldn't own it, you could kind of like have that part of you that was a little. Do you feel like that was one of the was that something about it, like, or did that just kind of like contribute to the appeal of like, oh, this is sort of a book I'm not supposed to be reading because it's talking about all this stuff?
Well, I definitely loved books with sex in it, and Judy Blume was the first person to like go there. I read forever, but Jackie Collins and Judith Krantz wrote about sex in a different way. I mean, it was definitely trashier, dirtier, more explicit. Yeah. There was the fine line between sex and violence. Like it was a different way of talking about sex. And at the same time, I just want to circle back to the whole double standard. Harold Robbins was writing these books, a male writer, and he was just considered this huge blockbuster success. Whereas the women doing it, it was trash. It was how dare you. I saw the documentary about Jackie Collins' life last night at Tribeca, and they had a clip, and this literally made my heart start beating fast. They showed her on a talk show where she was basically attacked by females in the audience saying, I started your book and then I threw it right out of my house. How could you do, something that would have never happened to a man, as if she'd broken some sort of code by daring to discuss that, yes, women enjoy sex too, or yes, this is a part of our life.
Yep.
And it was really, it really brought me back to like, oh yeah, that was the climate I read these books in. Like, no wonder it was something that stayed with me for the rest of my life.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and tell us a little more about I mean, that's such an interesting thing because honestly, we still see it, right? I mean, you still see this kind of takedown. If somebody is sexual or they are sexual in the wrong way or they're sexual in the right way, like it's so hard to keep track of like what's okay and what's not okay. And one thing that's so interesting about, the time in which we're living is we're kind of learning that it's all okay. And it's just that people have different thresholds of what they personally feel is right for them. And that's something that, on so many levels, but I'm going to circle back and not get into that quite. I just want to go into the documentary and what it was like for you last night, because that was a big thing that you went to this screening, and like, what was that like for you? And what was it like? There's sort of this lovely synchronicity between your book coming out now and like this documentary. Like, what did that feel kind of significant to you?
Well, it's really funny because I met Jackie Collins' daughter, Rory, last night, and I had sent her a copy of the book, and she's reading it. And when we met, she said, it's really interesting timing because you didn't know this documentary was in the works when you wrote this. And yet here we have these two different mediums revisiting my mother's work. And she's like, I feel like that's not an accident. I feel like she's still up there. Like her hand is still in this. And it like gave me the chills. So yeah, it was very meaningful for me to experience the premiere of the documentary, sitting in the audience with her daughters and her granddaughter. And also seeing, she had such a strong, glamorous public image, but seeing the woman behind that, which in the 80s and 90s, it wasn't as easy as it is today to get behind the facade. We didn't have social media. It wasn't as intrusive as the press was. There were still barriers to entry, which have fallen so much now. So there was, as much as I adore this woman and I've revered her my entire life, I really knew nothing about her personal life.
Yeah.
And I don't want to give too much away because I'm hoping a lot of you will watch it when it premieres on CNN at the end of this month.
Yes.
But she experienced so much sexism from her father. And the expectations for her were so low. And she also had this really intense love competition dynamic with her sister Joan, who of course was on Dynasty.
Yep.
Which is like my favorite show at the time. These sisters basically defined my entire pop culture taste.
They were the Kardashians of their day.
Absolutely. But they actually, you know, were putting out.
They actually.
Anyway, it's a whole other. So, yes, it was very meaningful, and it actually affirmed in a way that I didn't even realize what I was trying to say in Blush really does sync up with what Jackie Collins went through as a pioneer in this type of writing.
I love it. And the documentary, I believe, is called Ladyboss.
That's correct. It's called Ladyboss.
Ladyboss. I love it. Let's get back to Blush, though. Let's get back to, let's recircle and just talk a little bit without, you know, we're, as always, we do no spoilers on here. Like everybody, you know, pre-order the book, get your copy, read it for yourself. We're going to have, you know, a very circuitous discussion of things without getting too specific. But let's talk a little bit back again about the setting. And I mean, you were writing this pre-pandemic or during the pandemic, and like, did you get to go out to any of the wineries? Did you have any fun research trips before the world kind of shut down, or were you just like going there in your mind and and like giving yourself a little escape?
No. Luckily, this whole thing was almost completely written before the pandemic. So I spent many months visiting one specific winery on the North Fork called the Dell Cellars, and the CEO of that winery is also a writer, and he has a memoir out now called Little and Often. But we met before he even wrote this memoir, and he has his PhD in viticulture from Cornell, and really taught me everything about wine from literally the ground up. And I knew nothing about wine going into this.
Yeah.
And there's so many parallels between creating wine and life and storytelling. There's this concept in wine that it's called terroir. Same thing with cheese. And it means a sense of place or of a place. So the wine in the North Fork can only be from the, like it has certain things from the ground that cannot be replicated. Same with cheese that comes from a certain, you know, place, a certain farm. And the terroir informs that, and it's indelible. And sense of place, you know, we as people can move wherever we want and we can reinvent ourselves, but we can never change our place of origin. And so we have our own terroir, and that's something I wanted to explore in the book. You know, this woman, Leah, my protagonist, leaves the vineyard. You know, she's not valued by her father. She moves to New York. She becomes a person in her own right with her family. But the vineyard is always a part of her, and she cannot escape that pull. And so that is something I really wanted to explore. And I think that happens, it's true for a lot of us, you know, things that happen to us early, relationships, problems, impressions, even positive things like the early books we read, the early music we listened to. They form us in a way that things that come later in life simply cannot compete with.
It's true. And I mean, this is why I'm drawn to the books that I'm drawn to. This is why, like, I mean, I feel like my whole life is basically like one of these characters in one of these books where you kind of, you know, you move away, you do the thing, you do the big city, and then you kind of come back and like rediscover your roots. And like, I did that in my regular life. And these books really, this is why I love these books so much, is because, you know, I see myself reflected in them. On that idea of terroir, like place figures very heavily in your novels. Do you start with place, or do you start with, like, you know, for Blush, for example, did you think Vineyard? Did you think North Fork and then populate it with characters? Or did you think, you know, I want to tell like this story, like what was that process like of like, I want to tell the book, I want to write about these, you know, kind of my relationship with these novels of the past, and I want to write about a winery. Can you walk me through the process of where that began and your entry point into this book?
Place is definitely important. And starting with the Forever Summer, which I set in Provincetown, I realized, and that was 4 years ago, I realized how much the right place connected to the right story is just, it's a very important combination. And certain stories won't work in certain settings. And certain settings give you more to work with than others. So yes, I wanted a vineyard, and that was before I had the specific story. I chose a North Fork because I like to do research. I really want to spend time there. And that was geographically just the most reasonable place to set it.
Yeah.
But also I had been visiting the Hamptons a lot when I wrote Drawing Home and other things. And there was a wine there called Wolfer, Summer in a Bottle, rosé.
I love Wolfer. I love them.
And they also have a restaurant. And I realized that it's family owned, women owned. And that gave me the idea of a family and what's this family like and how did the daughter become the head of this. So that was kind of all brewing together. So yes, place is important, and place comes very early in the process.
And family is clearly an important thing in your books too. I mean, the multi-generational relationships, the multi-generational women, that's something that we see a lot in your writing, telling from different perspectives, and it's of different generations. And it's something that I'm attracted to as a writer as well. And I'm curious, what for you, you know, for some people, it's like they always kind of want to write the person whose age they are. What is it for you about the different ages and the different perspectives that's so appealing? I think it works very well in Blush and in your other books. And clearly it's something that you have a passion for. So what is it for you that kind of drives that artistic decision?
Well, I feel like I am all those ages. Like at this point, I'm 50, and I truly feel like I can almost understand how it'll feel, or I can very clearly imagine how it'll feel to be 70 and have all that perspective. I know what it's like to have the perspective now looking back to my 20s. And I still very much remember and feel like the same 23-year-old who moved to New York City. So I love writing at this age because I feel like I have access to all these vantage points. And to me, I feel like I definitely, get better with age. Like I so much appreciate who I am now. I would never want to be 20 again. And I can only imagine the richness I'll feel if I'm lucky enough to live to my 70s. So I love exploring life from those different perspectives. Like to me, I can't imagine telling a story from any other way, because if I only choose one perspective, I'm leaving all these other viewpoints and options on the table, so to speak. So I always want that three-tiered, at least, way of looking and telling a story.
Yeah, and on that, like the 3 point of views, as you said, you always pick at least 3 points of view, and you've done that from the very beginning, right? And in that, so approaching a novel, again, I'm kind of that author where I think in the same way. Like I don't know that I could even tell a story from one character's perspective. Like it's almost too, like my brain just doesn't work that way. Like it's like I always want to go down the rabbit hole and kind of explore it. For you, how do you kind of organize your thoughts? Because you also don't do, in this book, it's not like one chapter is Vivian, one chapter is Leah, one chapter is Stady. You rotate within chapters, and you don't always go in exactly the same order, I don't think. So for you, how do you go about organizing that from a structural standpoint, from a technical standpoint? Do you write sequentially? Do you just write the way that the book is going to be read? And then go back and make notes? Like, do you have note cards or Post-its with each character's storyline? How do you organize those threads? So
I know the story has to get from point A to point B. So the character point of view, I make decisions based on who's the best person to be telling this moment in the story.
Yep.
And that sometimes I don't always get that right on the first pass through. Like I think, oh, actually this scene would be more interesting if Vivian told it. Or sometimes we have a scene where everyone sort of chimes in. Yeah. There's a moment, let's say, like for some of the book club moments, because they form a book club. So in the book club, we'll get a little bit of each person's perspective, how they felt about the book, how they feel about the book club. It really is decisions based on what's best for the telling of that particular scene.
How different is this book and the published book from your first draft? How many drafts are you as a writer? Or, was this a different process? Did you have any unique challenges in this one? Like, what was that like? What was the process of creating this book over time?
So the book it's very much the way I wanted it to be or envisioned it to be. One big change from the first draft is, as I told you, my 20-year-old daughter inspired
Yeah.
Sadie, but my daughter is, very quirky and, very feminist. And, so the first read through, my agent said, maybe tone her down to be a little more
A little more
accessible.
every woman.
Yeah.
Every girl.
Because to me, my daughter, like, that's just, it seems
All
perfectly
kids.
normal. But
Yeah.
then I realized, oh yeah, that's a little, so I had to tone down Sadie
Yeah.
a bit. And I don't want to get spoiled the ending, but I had a real trouble figuring out what is the moment where the women really find their strength and really
Mhm.
find their unity.
Yeah.
And I say in the book, or one of the characters say, that where women gather, there is power.
Yeah.
And figuring out the one scene that would bring that to life was the hardest part in the book. And it came very late.
Mm-hmm.
Once I had that scene, then the book was pretty much good to go. And of all the books I've written, I'd say this was, aside from that one scene, pretty much exactly the way I imagined it from the beginning.
Yeah, that quote is like, to me, if there's a theme of this book, when it's where women gather, there is power. And like, I love that it's kind of this very delicate representation of that. I mean, it's, I think you nailed it. And, but I also think that there's a lovely kind of permission in this book of, as you said before, you're embracing like the femininity, and like there's many different ways to be a feminist. There's many different ways to be a strong woman. And, this idea of gathering both for pleasure and purpose is something that I think has always been tied to women and women in groups. And I love that this book really embraces that and kind of gives that permission. So for me personally, I think that's wonderful. Do you have groups in your life? Like, do you feel like you have a community of women, a family of women, women around you that encourage that sort of, self-actualization in you, and kind of what do you think we can do as women to do that for each other?
Well, I think very early on, when I first moved to New York, I did have a book club, which it was, actually probably my second year in New York, but book clubs were my first real organized group of women, aside from just like friends who would go out casually.
Yep.
More recently, during the pandemic, a bunch of authors and I established a weekly Zoom, which it started just like, let's talk one day, and we have sustained it through. Awesome. We still, even though things are opening up, we still meet every Thursday night, and we talk and we catch up. And you were saying before how virtual events aren't necessarily going away, and I think even it's without having to like get a babysitter or whatever you do to meet in person for dinner, we can always jump on our computer and just touch base and talk.
Yeah.
And it's been the most consistent group I've had in years, ironically, coming out of a time when I couldn't meet with people in a physical way.
Right.
And reminded me how important it is to kind of schedule that or create that space for ourselves. Because when we're running around like lunatics in our everyday life, it's very easy to feel like that's an indulgence or that's not something we have time for.
Well, I also think it's really important. I mean, you're a mother and an artist, and like, you have this great professional career. And I think it's really important. I mean, I'm a new mom, and it's really hard for me. Like this has been a really interesting time for me, because I realized how much I've internalized that thing of like, now that I'm a mother, I'm not allowed to have anything for myself, even a career, even like if I'm doing something for my baby or for my family, then like, that's what I should be doing. And like, oh God, the idea of me even indulging in anything that isn't work or caring for somebody else is like, and like, I'm somebody who was like, oh, I'm not going to care. Like, I'm a strong, powerful woman, and like, I'm going to own my individuality. But it's so great. I mean, the books like yours that give permission to say like, you're allowed to have fun too. You're allowed to take a moment for yourself, to do something for yourself. I think it's really important to normalize that. I think that might be the biggest thing that could shift our culture to actual more gender equality, is this idea that women are allowed to.
Well, I think it makes you a better mother if you're fulfilled and happy. You know, one of my biggest problems with my own mother is that she never found something outside of herself or us, I would say, to make her happy.
Yeah.
And then when I grew up and moved away, it's like, wait, what about me? What do I get out of this deal anymore?
Yeah.
And it really upset me. And so even though it's very hard to find a balance between things that give you fulfillment and taking care of your children, in the end, it can actually help you actually be better for her, because you are not going to feel resentful when she's not around.
Yeah, because because kids do grow up. And like, I just think we have to kind of normalize that, like the idea that like you're a mother and a person. And like, that's like, I hate when people ask the question of like, how do you do it? How do you balance family and career? Because nobody ever asks men that. But I do think it's important to remind people that women like yourself who are accomplished and are out there having these creative careers are, I'd like to move away from that stereotype of the artist as like the angry, like dysfunctional man who like drinks too much and is super toxic, and like more to like women know how to get stuff done, especially mothers know how to like be on deadline, compartmentalize, like do like get the stuff done. Like, cause you just have to, you don't have a choice. You have to do it. You have to get all these things done. How has being a mother influenced you as an artist and vice versa? Like, has there been a connection between that and how you approach those two sides of your life?
I wasn't writing when my kids were very little. I wanted to, but I didn't have the organization or the energy. Like, I'm amazed by people like you who can write with a young kid. I write
like 50 words a day. So like, it's not really writing.
Yeah, but it is, because I think what I didn't realize at the time is that you don't have to have the time to write your whole book in 6 months. I didn't have a lot of my daughter's 20 now. 20 years ago, I really did not have a community or anyone or any roadmap to doing this. There was no, things were not as connected as they are now. I was very isolated in wanting to do this. And my own mother never worked, and definitely made me feel like if you're doing anything other than focusing on your kids, like you're dropping the ball. So it really took me a long time to give myself permission to try to do this, especially because when you're first writing, you're not getting paid to do it.
Right.
So it's hard enough to work, to leave your kids to work when you can at least say, well, I'm bringing home some money.
Right.
But to take time away from them and not get paid, it felt very indulgent.
Yeah. And
I wish I hadn't let it hold me back, but I did. So I didn't publish my first book until my children were I think they were both in middle school, maybe at that time.
What was the thing? Was there a particular moment that made you go, now is the time? Did you just get to a point where you said, I can't not do this anymore? What was it that propelled you forward into finally kind of going after this in that way?
Well, ironically, even though I love reading Jackie Collins books, I realized, when I was around 40, stop waiting for permission, because no one's going to give you permission, and you don't need it. Yeah. And that was like a really big epiphany for me, because, I realized I kept waiting to be legitimate enough or real enough, or yes, it's the right time. And I just realized if I don't do this, I'm always going to regret it. Yeah. So stop waiting. And that's when I really, took the leap.
What was your journey to publication like after that decision? What was the timing between when you really started writing seriously and when you had your first book published?
Once I made the decision, it happened very quickly.
Very quickly. Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't say it was, it's never easy. And my first book, The Wedding Sisters, which was my first full-length novel, I didn't do a single event, it was nothing. It was just like, but it was just, wow. it got out there, you know. And it's been a lot of work and learning, you know, what it means, not just to like produce the pages, but to like, how do people learn about your book, and how to talk about a book. And it's so much more than I ever imagined, like good and bad. It's a lot. I don't think I could have done this with little kids, though. To be honest, as much as I wish I'd started earlier, it's a lot for me with a 20-year-old.
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible. It's a hard thing. It's a different kind of life, I think, the art life, especially when you're a solo creative. Like I've been, you know, my background's in the music industry, so I was in a band and I was a solo songwriter and performer. And like when it's all you, you know, when it's really you, and even though you have your team, you have your agent, you have your editor and things like that, you have, you know, it does take a village to put out a book. But when you're kind of, the buck stops with you, of like, if the pages don't get written, they don't get, you know, there's nothing to work with, right? So you've gone from being, you know, that person. I mean, it's pretty remarkable. You put out a book a year. And that is a grueling schedule. So how do you personally kind of even structure your time? How do you know, are you currently, I assume you've already turned in a book for next year. And I assume you've already, like, what's the timeline for you? How far ahead are you? Are you already working on the book after that?
I used to be much more ahead. So ideally, by July, I'm writing my book for 2 years from now.
Yeah.
Okay. And so let's say June, July, I've just handed in my book for next year, and I'm promoting my current book. Yeah. By September, October, I am like fully focused on writing that book for 2 years from now. My book for next year is being like copy edited. We're tying that up. We're talking about the cover. Yep. So, and then by May, June, I have to be getting that book submitted, because I don't want to be writing a book while I have to be promoting. I know I can't do that.
Yeah.
So now my book for next year is in the hands of my editor, and she'll come back with notes, and I'll do that. And this year's a little bit less rigorous because I'm not doing as many physical events.
Yeah.
But I want to actually get a little earlier, so that hopefully when physical events are back full steam next year, I'm not editing at all while I'm traveling.
Yeah, because I mean, it's a really hard thing to kind of switch through those modes, like those modes of performance and creation, right? And like promotion and creation. Like,
well, it's crazy. I just had to, literally this morning, I had to open this book and remind myself of the characters' names because I just handed another book, and those people are more vivid in my mind.
Can you tell us a little bit about that next book for next year?
So my next book is another, it's actually not 3 generations, it's 2 generations, and it's about a jewelry family, like a jewelry dynasty like Tiffany.
Super cool.
And there is an estranged daughter, and this is kind of inspired loosely by Lace, how the daughter was cast out and she returns to claim what was hers. And that's kind of the setup for my next book, which is called Gilt, G-I-L-T.
Oh, look at you. So do you write to a title? Like, I'm so intrigued by this. Like, does the title come first or does the title come later?
I really need a title. Like, I need it early. I don't always have it early, but it drives me crazy until I do. And it's funny because I was just talking to Kristen Higgins a few nights ago for the launch of her book. And she says she never has a title to the very end. Really? I'm like, how do you sleep at night? Like, it's like, it would be like bringing a baby home and like not having a name for months. Like, that's really.
Oh my God, that makes me embarrassed because we like didn't have a name for our daughter for like the first 5 years of her life, and all of our family were like, "What's her name?" And we were like, "We don't know." Like we knew that it's. And ironically, like my daughter is named Vivian, and you know Vivian is one of your main characters, and also Ellen Hildebrand this year, her book as a Vivian. I feel like there's like a little weird thing going on there with like, you know, when you're talking about your Jackie Collins like kind of thing. Like to me, it's like, oh, like Jamie Brenner and Ellen are like kind of like blessing this decision in my life of like, I have my Vivi. I knew her name was going to be Vivi, but I didn't know if it was going to be Vivian, Olivia, or Genevieve, and which like what her full name was going to be. I knew she was Vivi, but I didn't know. And finally, I was like, no, she's Vivian. She's not. As soon as she was born, I was like, no, she's not an Olivia. And we were vacillating between the other two, and I was like, no, she's really she's Vivian. Like she's Vivian. But like, so let's talk then naming characters. What's your naming process for characters like? Do you have like a running list of like, these are cool women names? Or like,
There's definitely names that I love. Like I actually used Olivia in one of my books, but I try to picture what they look like. Like I'll find a picture. And I used to go through magazines, but now I'll look on Instagram for a woman. I'm like, okay, this is her, and what does she look like? So I find an image in my mind, and then I match the name. Like, oh, she looks like this or that. I love naming characters. Like it's so much fun. And going back to Vivian, so who was the first person I saw in pop culture named Vivian was, do you remember? Julia Roberts' character in Pretty Woman.
Pretty Woman, yeah.
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 Because that was the first, because Vivian was a very old-fashioned name.
Yep.
And that I was like, oh wow, that's actually like super cool. But anyway, it's like I envision the woman or the man, and then I pick a name that's like, oh, he looks like, that's what a Frank looks like, whatever.
Yeah. Yep. That's weird because that's my husband's name. You're just like pulling
my
life. Wow. Which I don't think he looks like a Frank, which is funny. But so if you were to cast this, like who would be Leah? Who would be Vivian, Leah, and Sadie? Do you have actors or like
now? First of all, I'm terrible at this because I always think of actors as being 20 years younger than they are. Like to me, Julia Roberts still could be the 20-year-old. Like, I'm completely out of touch. But I would say now I'm watching this show with, oh my gosh, Joan Smalls. She's a woman in Hacks, and she's in Mare of Easttown.
Yes.
And she's
so good.
Phenomenal. What's her name? Is it Joan Smalls?
I think it is. Yeah. You're talking about the older woman.
Yes.
Hacks, right?
Right. The older woman Hacks. To me, like I would, if I could have her play Vivian, like
it's amazing.
Done. She's fascinating. Every move she makes is you're riveted to her.
Yep.
Then for Leah, the middle woman, like I don't even know who a 50-year-old actress is anymore because they're all trying to look younger.
Well, it's funny that you just mentioned Mare of Easttown because I feel like Kate Winslet would be like a good one for.
Oh my god! First of all, I haven't seen that yet, so no spoilers. I have like 50 direct messages of people telling me I have to watch this show, and next week that is my project. So
I actually haven't watched it either, and now I'm like questioning. I'm like, is Kate Winslet in Mare of Easttown? I think.
She is. Yeah, and of course, I love her. She's amazing. Sure. Let's say Kate Winslet. Okay, so now we just need the 20-year-old. Who's a 22-year-old actor anymore? I don't even know.
Honestly, don't know. I'm like so out of it. I don't know anything that's cool.
I'm gonna have to crowd cast this.
Yeah, somebody.
I don't know.
Oh, Jean Smart. Somebody commented.
Jean Smart. Thank you. Jean Smart.
Jean Smart. Yeah.
Thank you.
We need some social casting of this. So like we're gonna.
Yeah. Anyone who's remotely in touch with young people.
Anyone who's 20 will do.
22. Plus the fact I haven't seen a movie in the theaters in like a year, which is another like stumbling block.
Yeah. How was that how was it to be like out in the world, last night at that documentary? It was outside, right?
Yeah, it was outside. But yeah, it's just to have the group experience of clapping at the end. Oh my gosh. Look, as much as I love my Netflix, like you can't replace that. You can't. Oh, I guess Jennifer Lawrence is amazing, but she's not even that young anymore.
She's like 30. Like,
oh my gosh, I can't. I don't know.
I know. I don't even. But like, I think I'm 19, so I have no
idea. Exactly.
No, I'm not 19. I'm much older than 19. but like, yeah, I have no idea. Like, I see people, and I'm like, oh, I thought, like, oh, okay, you're 20. Oh my god. Like, like I don't even know anymore. And like, I'm so out of touch with what's cool and what's like, it's such a relief to not care anymore about like I have no chance of keeping up. So I'm just like, it's cool.
Yeah. I couldn't tell you who like the hot leading man is right now.
No.
Like, so it's like George Clooney can't play a hot 25-year-old?
Clooney would be like, I feel like he'd be like Leonard. Like, he'd be like.
Yes. Like, he's a grandfather now. He's the grandfather.
Yeah.
100%.
Like kind of, right? Like,
yeah.
Weird. That's like, it's so funny. Let's talk a little bit. Like, so you do have some in-person events coming up, right? Like, how are you feeling about those? You're going to be doing some bookstore events, and people can go find that on your Instagram and your Facebook and everything.
Yeah. And on my website under events, all my events are listed, and where it doesn't say Zoom, it's an in-person event. So I'm doing East End Books in Provincetown the weekend of June 26th.
Awesome.
I'm doing Main Point Books in Wayne, Pennsylvania, July 13th. And I'm going to be doing an event with Sparta Books in New Jersey. We just don't have an exact date yet. All outdoors. And yeah, because these are bookstores, I know them and I know their customers. These are women I've been meeting with for years, and I missed them last year. And I feel really comfortable like getting together with them in person outdoors.
Yeah. And are you a wine person in general? Like in this, like I want to go back to the wine a little bit and to the research. I mean, like, clearly this, I forget the person's name who you said, there was a man on North.
Trent Tresler, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're researching this. I feel like I learned so much about wine and about winemaking. What's your relationship to wine? Is it something that you enjoy? Is it a casual enjoyment? Is it like, are you interested in, like my brother is super interested in like wine as like a trading thing. He's a trader. So like, he's like, oh, like this wine and this value. And like, do you have does wine play a fun role in your life in terms of, anything? I feel like now I'm asking you if you're an alcoholic.
No, ironically, I really don't drink very often, but if I do, I would like just on a summer night, a glass of rosé, or if I'm having dinner in a French restaurant, like just one glass of like a great, deep red, like, and I love, there's a store, a place in New York City called Murray's Cheese, and they had classes of wine and cheese pairings. So, to have a cheese board with the right glass of wine or two like that, I like to experience wine that way. But I don't really drink on a regular basis. It's like a special thing for me. And I think wine, can be really special. And researching this book made my selective enjoyment like that much more heightened. And I think women who read this book will learn, even if they know nothing about wine, they're going to learn a little bit. Like even little things. Like I had no idea that all wine, like all grapes start green and then they turn red in this process called raisin. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but just little things like that. It's winemaking is an art and a craft. And I have so much more appreciation for it now. It's a fascinating,
and it's a science. I mean, it's so interesting. There's so much to go. I love visiting wineries. Like I'm like you, where I really love to savor a glass of either, I'm really a red or a pink drinker, like I'm very much that. I guess it's basic, but like, in the summer, I pretty much only drink rosé, and in the winter, I pretty much drink red. And like, that's, and then that's kind of all I drink. Like I might have a cocktail here and there, but I'm pretty much a wine drinker when I do drink, which is not frequently, especially now that I have a baby. But it's such an interesting thing, and it's a long process, in not dissimilar to a book. Like you have to have, patience, and you have to kind of cultivate the story, and like it's almost a meditative practice in a way when you see.
Well, what's interesting also, like writing a book, you don't know at the beginning of the growing season how things are going to turn out. There's no guarantees. One bad storm late in the season, you could really have compromised grapes. So there's a lot of risk involved. And, for anyone who's really interested in this, I highly recommend this book called The Vineyard. The name of the author escapes me, but it's about the first vineyard on the North Fork, started by a married couple.
Cool.
And it's not glamorous. It is hard work. And there's a lot of chance, and like writing a book, you try your best. It's not every book can be your best book. Some stories, really keep you up at night because it's just not coming together. And it's the same with, cultivating a crop for harvest.
Yeah. Jamie, on that note, what's the best writing advice you've ever gotten, and what's the worst writing advice you've ever gotten?
Oh, so the best writing advice is to read and know like what you're writing, like to understand what your book is supposed to be, so you're not wandering in the dark. And even when I worked in publishing, I would see a lot of books that just didn't know what it wanted to be. And even the best craft of writing can't overcome that if the book is confused. So no, like, are you writing a mystery? Are you writing women's fiction? Is this a literary tome? Know that. Like, just know where you are.
Yeah.
The worst writing advice, I've read Stephen King's book, and he's amazing, and there's great advice in there. But the idea that there's something shameful about not having a first draft in 3 months is that I feel like that's not necessarily true. Like, yes, you can get 90,000 words on the page in 3 months, but if it's going to actually be a draft that's usable, I don't know. I don't think that's necessarily a bar that like, I found that to be an unrealistic bar.
Yeah. What's your actual process like on a day-to-day basis? Are you a write every day at the same time of day kind of person? Are you a fit it into the margins kind of person? Do you write longhand? Do you write on a computer? What's your preferred process, knowing that there's always going to be some variation?
So I always, when I'm really in like writing mode, I wake up first thing and I start writing. And if writing longhand sometimes helps me slow down and just like not be perfectionist, because you can just like cross things out. And then sometimes I'll write a chapter and then I'll type it into the computer. And I have a word count in mind. Like today I really need to do 1,500 words. So I'll do that, or 3,000, whatever. And then I always print out that day's work so I can at least feel the reward of 5 pages. And the manuscript will slowly pile up on my desk, and I need that tangible encouragement to see it growing. So it's every day. And like, and I'm actually kind of uncomfortable when I'm not in the middle of a book. Like I finished one. Yeah, I finished one last week, and I was like, "Thank you." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm gonna take some time before I start the next one." And I almost don't know what to do with myself mentally. So,
how long do you usually wait until you get back into it?
Like within days.
Yeah. You do feel kind of adrift, and it's sort of this idea of like, oh, thank God it's done, and then you're like, okay, but like I gotta get to the next one because my brain, like, it can't rest, or like.
Well, Toni Morrison had this great quote that she loves writing so much because when she's not writing, she has to deal with life.
Yeah.
And I love that. And I was actually reminded of that in Fran Lebowitz's the documentary about her, Pretend It's a City, where she's interviewing Toni Morrison. And because Fran Lebowitz said she doesn't believe anyone who enjoys writing can possibly be a good writer, except for Toni Morrison. She's like, if you enjoy something, you're probably really bad at it.
Oh my God, I love that.
I know.
But that's such a good reminder, because I do feel like, I feel like it's hard to walk the line between enjoyment and like kind of self-flagellation, and like there should be an element that you enjoy it, right? Like, I don't know.
Well, I always write a draft that I enjoyed writing, and I think it's great. And then I show my agent, and he's like, there's so much you have to fix here. And I'm like, really? I love this. But see, that's the thing. So you write the book you enjoy, and then then the work comes to making it the book you can publish.
Yeah.
So I think there's a little bit of both.
I love that. We're almost out of time. I want to just say I've lost track of the written conversation, but I'm going to try to get a couple quick questions from the audience. From Margaret, how is it jumping back into promoting something when your mind is still running on something more recent?
It actually feels really good. It takes some of like the pressure off of the project that I was like grinding out by the end. And it reminds me of, how much I wanted to bring Blush, like that story, into the world. So this is really like a really beautiful moment. I love this time in the writing cycle.
Yeah, it's fun. Sorry, I'm trying to find, I know there were some other questions up here, but I might just not be finding them right now. But Jamie, your book is wonderful. You are wonderful. Always. We love Blush. I mean, it's such a great book club book, obviously. Good. Do you find it easier or harder to write in multiple POVs? What was the hardest scene in it? Let's focus on the second half of this question, because you've already kind of talked about the multiple POVs, but what was the hardest scene in your book to write?
So the hardest scene, there's a scene towards the end where the women really discover, like there's like this like aha moment where they figure out what they need to do. And it's like they've been brought to this moment from reading these books and discussing these books, and I don't want to give it away, but I wasn't sure how to, reading and loving a book, it's hard to make that visual.
Yeah.
Like, or coming to an understanding, like how do you put that on the page in action?
Yep.
So this was really a hard challenge for this book. And I talking to my agent and thinking about the research, the scene came to me very late in the process, about a week before New York City shut down. So when you read the book and you see everyone together, you'll know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yes. And again, please pre-order your copy of Blush. Pre-orders are hugely important. They really help on multiple levels. Jamie, do you have a bookstore or two that you want to give a shout out to? Maybe some suggestions of where people can order the books, possibly signed copies?
I will definitely have signed copies from East End Books in Provincetown. I will have signed and personalized copies at Main Point Books in Wayne, PA. And the other bookstores on my tour that I'll be doing events for, they'll all have book plates that you can order the book and they'll put my signature in the book. If we'll make it work. If you're having trouble and you really want your book signed, just get in touch with me through my website. Yeah. Follow me on Instagram, Jamie Brenner Writes. I'll have updates on my tour there and updates on places to get signed and personalized books.
Awesome. And congratulations again on Blush. It comes out June 22nd officially. One last question as we go. What is your ideal day on the North Fork of Long Island?
Well, I don't drink all the time. I do love food. So I will always be looking for, any place I go, I'm looking for a bookstore. I need a great iced tea and some good food and a good ice cream shop. So whether it's in North Fork or Chatham or, Provincetown, like those are my spots.
I love it. You're a woman after my own heart. I love that you're a tea drinker. That's like, I don't drink coffee. I drink tea. And that sounds great. Well, we will go on that vacation with you anytime, Jamie, and we will take one of your fabulous books with us to read while we go. Congratulations on Blush, and thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you, everyone, for being here. As always, we love seeing you every Friday. Next Friday, we have Ellen Hildebrand. We're getting into June is like the month of the summer books, and here we go. So join us next week at noon for another Lit Chick interview. And until then, happy reading and pick up Blush.